Good afternoon and welcome to this broadcast from Cardiff Metropolitan University. Prynhawn da a chroeso i'r darllediad hwn gan Brifysgol Metropolitan Cardydd. It's midday and time for the second episode of our summer professional webinar series produced by the Cardiff Partnership for Initial Teacher Education and originally broadcast earlier this academic year. Your presenters today are Professor Gary Beauchamp from Cardiff Metropolitan University, Josephine Farag from Cardiff High School, Abi Chase from Bassaleg School and Finola Wilson from Impact School Improvement. The webinar is introduced today by the Director of Teacher Education and Professional Learning, Dr. Anna Bryant.
Croeso mawr I chi gyd. A warm welcome to you all to the second in the series of the Cardiff IT Partnership Research Webinars, which focuses tonight on online and digital pedagogy. One key purpose really of these webinars is to support a discussion on how research and professional practice talk to each other. Essentially then, that lines up with our research-informed clinical practice model that we've adopted in the partnership. We really hope that these sessions stimulate a collaborative professional learning discussion in your school, with staff, IT students, and even the pupils around this agenda. So please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A function tonight, and one of the team will respond to you. All the webinars throughout the series are recorded, and we have created a channel on the Cardiff IT Partnership team site where we have uploaded the presentations from the first webinars and the link to each of the webinars. So just click on the tab Webinar 1 at the top, and then it'll take you to that site. We've also placed some resources there to support you around research and the inquiry agenda as well. So, moving on to tonight, we have a really excellent lineup for you tonight, and it's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Gary Beauchamp, Associate Dean of Research at the Cardiff School of Education and Social Policy at Cardiff Metropolitan University. Croeso mawr, Gary.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm just going to attempt the wonders which you're sharing. So there's a PowerPoint to share with you at the moment. What I intend to do is to give you a little whisk through what research says about pedagogy and digital. So at the moment, I've started this title with Digital Pedagogy, the Cart Before the Horse, which might make sense as we move through. Apologies to any Joe's IT students who may have seen a longer version of this before, but hopefully it'll be worth the second viewing. So let's start with a long statement. I will give you about 10 seconds to read it. It's the longest quote I'm going to use, but this is from the Digital Education Advisory Group in Australia. So I'll let you read it. I don't want to read it aloud to you. So what I'm trying to do in the first few slides is set the context for this. We all know that this is the case, I think, now in the world that we work in. But one of the things about ICT, and I've stuck with the old ICT for the moment, but I think we're increasingly moving to digital tools or digital competence or digital this, that and the other. The use of technologies in teaching, which is what I'm talking about, it can complement, it can enrich, and it can transform education. But my set of scales here, just using it is not enough because it can distract, it can confuse and make things worse. Hopefully I won't do that today, but you never know. But again, it's a set of scales. We've got to weigh these things up before we use it. So moving on, this is something I show to people a lot. So this is 1990, personal computers. Most of you watching this are far too young to remember this. But let's move forward to the 2000s. We had the first BlackBerry. And if we move on a bit further, up to 2010 with the iPad, 2007 the iPhone, and I don't mean these as just those, so a tablet or a mobile phone which does lots of other things. The reason for showing you this is just to remind you that when the PlayStation came out, a child who's 25 now, they've had a PlayStation type thing available if they can afford all of their lives. 18, I remember BlackBerries, students with typing with their thumbs and things like that. So anyone who's 18, they've had this sort of thing all of their life, and more scarily, the mobile phone, which does lots of things, the child's are now 13, so anybody up to year 7, 8, 9, they've had something like an iPhone all their lives, and you can see where this is going. Anybody at the top end of primary school has had an iPad or tablet all of their life. You'll know yourselves, lots of you, that the intuitive thing for most young children is to tap and poke, and this is where it comes from. So this is where we're working with. You're dealing with children who are highly experienced in technology, and I'm not getting across the digital divide that there may be them that haven't got it, but increasingly they're very familiar with that type of technology. I'm going to start with a quote here. It goes back to the 1990s. That's probably the oldest quote I'm going to use. Computers of themselves are not transforming. In other words, just having a computer made no difference. And I'm going to work my way through this with other technologies as well. So just moving forward here, always good to quote yourself. ICT has evolved from being a subject that's taught by teachers to learners, or a resource or tool owned by the teacher, to become a shared resource or tool for learning and teaching by both of them. And this is the premise of what I'm talking about here now. Technology is not just the teachers anymore, and the pupils themselves become a resource. So what whizzed you through this is the idea of a ICT in the career of a teacher. I've slightly adapted this from a research paper, the reference at the end. When you begin, you tend to be building up a better knowledge of what you're going to teach. And the stuff in the red is my sort of, you're beginning to use how technology can help develop your ongoing understanding. So if you want something, you typically Google it or you use other resources. So it helps you to understand. You then build up practical experience as a teacher. A part of that, as the red, is how to teach with technology. And risks is a big thing here. It's really important that you feel able to take risks with this one. Moving on again, as you build up a repertoire of teaching strategies, you become skillful as a teacher, but skillful as a teacher with technology as well. And I put taking even more risks, because I think that's where we're going with this. Finding out as your career progresses, finding out what teaching strategies do and do not work for you as a teacher. In red, becoming effective as a teacher with technology and learning from your mistakes. And part of that is realizing that what works for one teacher might not work for you, and what works for you one day might not work next year with a different class. And finally, and I think we all, every one of us around this table, me included, we're continually increasing our understanding of what works and does not work for students of whatever age they are. And I think becoming effective in facilitating student learning with technology with your pupils. I think it's a key message I want to get across here. This is not done to, it's done with. If we move on, and the references at the end, and I can share these if they're of use to any of you later on. So using classroom can be influenced in part by who makes decisions. Now that's the people. That could be teachers, classroom assistants, but it does facilitate levels of engagement with objects, but we're controlled by who can interact with who. When this happens, and what is, and I put allowed because sometimes it is, can we do this? Well, why not? But those sorts of things affect our engagement with technology. But we also got the availability and positioning of suitable resources, including ICT. So the more resources there are, and I don't just mean technology ones, the more possible interactions. So some primary schools I've seen keep iPads on a bookshelf in the classroom and not in a cupboard. So children, if they think it's the right thing, shouldn't just go and get it. But also you see PCs, fixed PCs facing the wall sometimes, or laptops. Walls can't discuss much learning. So I think probably think about that as well, because walls aren't the best conversation partners. Moving forward, the idea of a mediating artifact. This is an idea of technology comes between you and the learner and between a learner and a learner. So although language, talking, remains the most important cultural tool, we've got other tools, and I mean paper, books, pens, and technology that can help this. It's the availability, of ICT to provide a range of tools in one place. You will probably remember, I certainly remember many years ago, where you had to have a camera and a recorder and a phone. Now it's all in one place. And so these tools can mediate learning, get in the way of learning or help learning. Another quote here, however, only by being part of the action do mediational means come into being and play their role. I've put the bold in, you'll see a pattern here. They have no magical power in and of themselves. In other words, it's got to be part of the activity, just being used is not enough. Moving on. You've probably seen these images before, they're quite well known in things, but I'm going to adapt one of them. So information, lots of random facts, like a quiz. Knowledge, we start to build connections with these things. What I want to promote to you this one is understanding. And understanding, you'll see that they change. It's tentative, then it becomes firm, then you learn something else. And so we constantly, to understand things, need to experiment and learn, and it's not fixed. Understanding develops and changes over time, and my suggestion is that ICT can help with that. So why use ICT? It can be quick. Okay, don't worry about the bold is the bit that matters here, but quick can be a bad thing, as you've just seen. Okay, It automates. I'm automating these things. And what I'm saying here, why bother using it? Well, if you want something done quickly, maybe ICT. If you want something automated, maybe ICT. It can store large amounts of information, which we couldn't do the years gone by. For a range of different things, we can show a video, we can show a still image, we can show a live Google Maps, we can see all these things going on in a range of different ways. If people don't understand it one way, you can represent it in another. Provisionality, the idea of playing, redo and undo is what most people think of, but if you're not sure, try it, see what happens. And finally, the interactivity. In this case, it means don't get bored. A program, a computer will just do it and do it and do it. So we won't necessarily do that, we get bored. But if you want that type of thing, use technology. Moving forward, because I'm on high speed mode, interactivity, I'm talking about technical interactivity, that's between the students and you and the devices. But we've also got pedagogical interactivity, that's the teaching, the thinking behind what you're doing, and that's between learners and other learners and teachers. But we've also got this conceptual interactivity, that's between learners and ideas and concepts. And ICT can help at all of these things. In reality, though, this is a distributed learning thing. In reality, learning is distributed in some form between the technology, the learner, and the context. And there's absolutely nothing, my bold again here, there's nothing inherent in technology that automatically guarantees learning. And this is a bit old, but I don't think it changed at all, this idea. But you'll see a pattern here moving through. Mobile learning, why bother? We've always had mobile learning. Quite honestly, this is a long quote, but I remember taking my class as a primary teacher with a clipboard and a piece of paper. That was mobile learning. Incidentally, it always rained and everything got smudged, but we've always had mobile learning. Also, mobile devices can become disruptive, and some teachers are sometimes worried that they can disrupt. Okay, they carefully plan this thing, particularly on a student teacher, and then it goes wrong. But M-learning, mobile learning, can enhance, extend and enrich. And I'm going to do these next ones really quickly, and I'm happy to share this with you. You can do this in your own time, really, because there's other things and time's moving on, I think, a little bit. So we've got contingent learning, where pupils react to the environment around them. So if you take them somewhere, the environment, because you've got the technology, they can still learn and respond to it. We've got situated learning, so you take them to a church or a synagogue or St. Fagans or somewhere. So the learning is made meaningful by the situation. We've got authentic, you can take them to something where it really happens and see technology being used and them use it themselves. Context aware, the physical surroundings help to inform the learning. So we've actually got taking notice of what we're at in woodland settings. As long as you've got a mobile or a signal, we can suddenly do learning in a real situation. And the last one, perhaps most important for certain children, is that personalised learning. We can customise it. However, you'll get the pattern. The use of M-learning tools in themselves does not guarantee their potential being realised. The key to success is the ability of educators to design and develop pedagogically sound opportunities, environments that enhance learning. These are all from published research papers. But you'll see a pattern now, and this is my cart and horse. Is it the digital or is it the pedagogy? I just want to end with showing you a little example of something which is just not possible any other way, and that's sometimes what technology does. This is from a published paper which I've done with some colleagues. We had children in a primary school in England. We had children in a primary school in the northeast in Newcastle area. We had small groups on each side, and they had a big multi-touch table. Now that's like a very big iPad, some of the kids called it. So on each tablet, a very big table, we connected it via the internet, and they could see each other via Skype. It makes more sense in a minute now. So they had, you'll see the two children, one in South Wales and one in the Newcastle area, and these are the size of the tables. Now they are connected via the internet. Okay, and they can see each other on a device you might just see in front of them. They had 12 clues for a problem. They couldn't solve it on their own. They had 12 clues which would help them to finalise it. They could do everything they could do on the tablet, multi-touch. They could turn, move, twist and resize. But what they could do is to flick. It was a new thing, so flick over the internet. So let me show you a little clip to finish with. This is a movie of, it's about 30 seconds, I think, or slightly more. You'll see on the left one group of children, you'll see on the right the other group of children. From a research perspective, it's very interesting to see what they did and the way they did it. But watch, and I'll talk over the top of it, how they flick a clue to solve the problem between them. It's very hard to put into words.
Yeah, I think
You'll see the one on the left is talking, the one on the right is just looking. Watch the girl on the left flick, and there it comes in South Wales, and it bounces back, which is they had quite a lot of fun with, and we had to adjust for the second time. But you can see these clues, they had to share the clues with each group to solve the problem. And it's impossible to do, this is the thing about technology, we couldn't do it any other way, apart from having little physical pieces of paper. So this is the last reason, I think, why you use technology. It just can't do any other way, it can offer something new. So just to finish, back where we started, and this is the last slide for Tom and people who know the next thing here. Back where we started with a twist, it was digital pedagogy, the cart before the horse. What I'm suggesting here, technology in itself is not transforming, but teachers are. So in other words, just having technology doesn't mean a thing. It's the way that you use it, and that should be driven by your pedagogic beliefs about how your children learn. And I would say it's my set of scales. If it's not worth using, don't use it. I'd still rather read children a big book than show them something on a screen. So it's that choice. But if you use it well, but you make the difference, not the technology. And that's about my time done, I think.
Thank you very much there, Gary, for a really excellent and insightful presentation. And I think it was really evident there how the research informs the teaching. And I think one of the key messages there, it's teachers and the people and the pedagogy that make the difference. So, really important take-home message. So thank you. So next up, it's a great pleasure to introduce Jo Farag, who's the Programme Lead for the PGC ICT and Computing and Head of ICT and Computer Science at Cardiff High. So welcome, Jo.
Thank you. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about the part digital leaders play to support the digital competency framework at Cardiff High School. The school took a top-down approach led by the leadership team, and I was appointed as one of the digital leads to support that. Next slide, please. So the focus is purely today about the digital leaders process. So I created 6 steps, as you can see on the screen, to explain the journey that took place from the initial what's missing to reflecting on the process. So for each slide that I go through, I'll explain each step. So next slide, please. So what's missing? Trying to establish what was missing meant looking at a variety of sources, and that was the research, to find out what we currently do to what was actually missing. So I looked at our school vision, which is towards the light, striving for the highest standards of education, and our philosophy that students are candles to be lit, not bottles to be filled, by Robert Schaffer. I also looked at the Successful Futures report, in particular recognising the importance of the 4 purposes and the DCF for looking at what was needed for the 4 strands to compare what we currently do. So I did a staff audit and a pupil audit to identify any of the gaps and spoke to a number of feeder primary schools to find out what their digital leaders were doing in their schools and what impact they had actually had. Next slide, please. So this gave us the time to assemble, analyse and share the vision. So the findings showed that to successfully implement the DCF whole school, training was needed, not just for the skills point of view, but to understand the DCF requirements as well. And this was where the digital leaders came in. So they could really support staff, not just by giving them the skills, but also saving time out of lessons, which ultimately would reduce costs of cover. It would also mean that anyone would have the opportunity to develop. The digital leaders had a vision, and that was based on the 4 purposes. Can you click again, please? And how they could develop life skills and confidently become digital citizens. Next slide. So this is where, based on what we found, creating the job spec came in. So the sort of things we came up with was that they needed to be able to be confident individuals. They needed to be able to understand the digital competency framework, and they needed to actually have a voice. So a pupil voice to share within the school community was vital for the role. So next slide, please. So then we advertised, and this was a top-down approach. The role promoted through assemblies was important. It was a high-profile role. It was advertised in form time and lessons, and pupils were invited to email and give reasons why they wanted to be digital leaders and what they could actually bring to the role, because the importance was that they would have skills, but also they would develop further skills. So we shortlisted and invited the pupils for interview and induction, and we discussed the requirements of the role and what they could actually do to support the school. It was about listening to what they could offer as well. So they signed up, they signed the contract, they got the badge. I think that was the happiest part of the actual induction, but they were all up for it, so it was really positive. And then it was just about implementing what we planned the gaps were at the beginning of the process. So next slide, please. So as you can see on the screen, there's a number of images that cover what the digital leaders did. They definitely embraced the role, and they started to raise the digital profile, not just internally, but externally as well. Their roles involved representing their form. They became part of the pupil voice in the school, so they attended leadership meetings. They were promoting online safety in assembly. You could see to the left of the screen that they were sat at the desk, and that was really at parents' evenings. They asked parents questions about some of the concerns they had, and then that was answered using our website. So we had a specific page to answer parents and pupils' concerns. And a few of them came up with some plays about cyberbullying, and that was done in assembly. It was done at a kids meet. They promoted this through their form, and they continually sort of embraced, as I say, the role. Next slide, please. So these are some of the things that they actually came up with as well. So they took part in inset training. When we actually introduced Google Suite, they produced some videos for pupils and teachers. They supported the implementation of the digital portfolio that was done throughout the school, and they were able to support teachers within the class and pupils and be able to explain exactly what they needed to do to make sure that they sort of promoted the best possible work in their portfolio. And as I say, they did video tutorials that were sort of supporting the learning within all different subject areas. So that was really positive. Next slide, please. And here you can see the evidence of the questions and answers that they did on the website, and parents were able to look at that and sort of see what sort of concerns other parents had. They contributed to the standard operating procedures of the school, by creating different resources, and that was basically put in the pupil planner so they could actually see the requirements of the DCF. So for example, on the screen you can see one of the strands, so they could actually see the sort of things that were needed in their digital portfolios. So again, really important for the implementation of the DCF. Next slide, please. So we needed to stop and think about sort of what we'd done and what had happened. So reflecting and looking at what went well. And there were a lot of things that went well, but again, things that we could improve on, so them even better ifs. And it was about making links to share this with other schools and to share good practice. That's where they were invited to present for the consortium and, as I say, the kids meet and just further develop. And then we had our inspection in 2019, and that was a really great boost for the digital leaders. And as you can see, it said that digital leaders develop a wide range of skills effectively by training pupils, teachers and other adults to develop their proficiency in ICT. So that really did encourage them to even go further. And then what we did some audits, again thinking about what pupils wanted and what teachers wanted, and it was sort of things like further skill development, further progression in understanding what the next steps were for the DCF and things like that. So it was really encouraging. So next slide, please. So what's next? So it would be really great to have digital leaders here. So how could this work for Cardiff Met? Any feedback would be really useful. So you could put some comments and in the Q&A link if you want, that would be lovely. And then we could pick them up again. Next slide, please. So this was the plan of action that I came up with in relation to how we sort of implemented digital leaders in Cardiff High School. And I created this as an interactive form, so you could actually use and really just share the information and come back and tell us, you know, how it worked in your organisation or things that could be improved with the form. That would be lovely. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Jo. Diolch yn fawr iawn, to really show you wonderful insight into how perhaps you've used resources and literature to design digital leaders within your own school. So really lovely to see that tonight. So it's a real pleasure next to introduce Abi Chase, who is Associate Head Teacher at Bassaleg School. Croeso, Abi.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, so today I'm here to talk about how we've developed our pedagogy for blended learning at Bassaleg School, and also to go through how research has informed our kind of developments and how research informs our practice. In order to do that, I think the best place to start is where we were with our pedagogy before any of the kind of COVID scenario hit us. And basically what that looks like is what you can see on the screen. So I started in post September 2019, and my role was specifically to lead pedagogy and reflective practice. And it was a brilliant opportunity for us to kind of give everything a bit of a shake-up. We had a bit of a restructure, and we kind of remodelled our leadership of pedagogy in that in every curriculum area now there is a leader of skills who I work very closely with to basically constantly talk about, evaluate, experiment and reflect on our pedagogy so that our pupils can develop their skills and so that our staff can develop their skills now as well. And as a team, what we did at the start of last year was we kind of sat down and asked ourselves, what does good learning look like in our curriculum areas? What's going really well? Where are our areas of strength? Where could things be developed? And as a team, then we kind of co-constructed what we've labelled our pillars of pedagogy. The metaphor is deliberate. We kind of all share an understanding that these pillars effectively hold up effective learning experiences for our pupils. Where these are done well and where they're developed to a high quality is where the learning experiences are most successful. So you can see them on the board, and I'm sure similar areas of pedagogy will resonate in a lot of schools, because these are kind of essentially what we thought made up brilliant lessons in our school. Same time, I was also working with Voice 21 on their Oracy Leaders course, officially qualified now, which is brilliant. And they engaged us a lot with discussion about the place of research in day-to-day practice. And they showed us this quote, which kind of stayed with me because it really made me think about my own understanding of research and practice and the link between them. And they kind of talked about this idea of when researchers talk about what works, what they mean is what worked then in that context. And that won't always work in every context for every child every year. We work in a profession where pupils kind of change every year, the job changes every year, and as such our relationship with research has to be one that is ongoing and constantly evaluative. And we started to really delve into this idea of engagement with research and engagement in research, and thinking about the two differences. And this really links in to my work with Cardiff Met as well as Research Champion. I know when I did my PGCE and when I've previously engaged with kind of research informed practice, it often felt like the two were running parallel, but weren't always necessarily kind of linked explicitly. You know, my day-to-day practice and then my research, they kind of sat somewhat separately at times. And that's where this conflict between engaging with research and engaging in research comes from. So to engage in research means that you bring it into your day-to-day practice. You're asking yourself, what is my classroom telling me? What is frustrating me? What is exciting me? What can I do about those things? And then you look out to the research. What is there around? What are other people saying about this? How can I use that to help me develop my own practice for my own pupils? And when you approach it with that model, you get an environment where research is supporting but not replacing professional judgment. There is a danger at times, I think, for us to let research dictate what we see. And as I've said, it might work in some contexts, but that doesn't mean it'll work everywhere. And we have to have that confidence in our own professional judgment. It means that research becomes something that is rooted in our daily practice. It's not that kind of luxury or that bolt-on that we go to when we've got time. It's something that is informing what we do on a day-to-day basis. And as a result, it empowers us to help kind of build on our practice-based knowledge and strengthen that relationship. What's going on elsewhere? How does that reflect in my own classroom? And that's something that Voice 21 really kind of inspired me with. Their approach to this is mostly linked to Oracy, but I could definitely see how this model could be applied to reflective practice across the board. So what we did then as a team was we started asking questions of our pillars. What does effective practice look like? What do these pillars look like as they stand? And we started to co-construct all the kind of tools that would go into making that pillar work. And this is just one example for our modelling pillar of all the things that we knew were going on in the classroom. and all of the things that we knew were happening. And then we started to ask ourselves, okay, that's brilliant, but what do we do with that? How do we use this to continually push our pedagogy forward? And how do we use this as a professional learning tool? And again, with Voice 21, I was engaged in a similar kind of project for oracy, which was also kind of engaging me in further active research, in action research. But I could definitely see how their model would kind of translate to reflective practice within our school. So I started working with the leaders of skills in particular to ask questions about their classrooms. What do you want your classroom to look like? What does it look like now? Where are the gaps? Where are the questions? Where are the potential areas for inquiry? And we started to kind of really build this environment of professional inquiry, where areas for development were seen as opportunities, things to get excited about, things to look into. And this kind of conversation was really empowering across the board, instead of staff kind of feeling like they were struggling with a particular area. It was posed as a question: how can I do it? And what we found was that a lot of the answers to these questions were actually within our own staff team, and what we needed was to kind of try and utilise our knowledge to empower everyone within the team. And this built to our reflective practice kind of projects that all leaders of skills undertook over the course of last year. Just an example on the board, we've got lots and lots of different examples. We started with a question, we had a clear rationale, we looked out to the research, and then within these documents on the next few pages, which I haven't included, but we had the development of strategies, evaluation, and what next. And then that would go back into a cycle where someone else could pick it up, or the same members of staff could continue to pursue this kind of constant cycle of reflective practice. And the thing we kept pushing was that these research questions come from us, not from outside. We start with what we've got in front of us, and we use the research to help us develop that. This is another example of a question asked by one of our leaders of skills that led to some really interesting kind of research that then went on to inform the practice of the whole LLC department, which was, as I've said, really interesting. And again, this mirrored really well with my work with Cardiff Met as research champion for the ITE students. What we had essentially was a kind of army of teachers of varying experience, all out on the ground at Bassaleg School, asking questions, researching, kind of having that kind of dialogue with each other. And it didn't matter how long or kind of little you'd been teaching. These were questions that everybody was interested in, and that kind of collaborative environment was really inspiring. We were building up a really great momentum. And I had lots of kind of anecdotal conversations with the ITE students about how, you know, one of them had collaborated on a project with their mentor, one of them had collaborated with a student in another subject area, and it was a really exciting time. We got involved with Twitter as a vehicle for sharing good practice, and with a site as big as ours and over 100 staff, sharing good practice can be really tricky. So using Twitter to kind of share and borrow and kind of experiment with each other's ideas was really, really useful. And it all kind of accumulated in January to our pedagogy fair, where for the first time we had every single member of staff, from our student teachers, our learning support assistants, teachers and senior staff, all at a stall selling their ideas, talking to each other about pedagogy. This is probably one of my highlights of last year. I think it was by far my favourite day, just talking about what makes good teaching, what makes us excited. And then of course March kind of hit, and all this kind of momentum that we feel that we'd built was kind of brought to a halt when the pandemic kind of hit us, and we kind of entered what's been called the crisis phase, which is very motivating. So the crisis phase, which essentially was about damage limitation, how quickly can we get the best we can do at the time together for our pupils. We were very lucky at this stage because we were already a Google school, so all of our pupils were on Google Classrooms. And during the crisis phase, essentially, what we had was a model where work was uploaded. It was very much an asynchronous model. Learners were very much kind of expected to learn independently with very little interaction from teachers. And I think I'll keep this for the rest of my career. It's kind of the chaotic, panicky kind of experience of what that felt like. This doesn't work, I can't find this, where do I find that? I think we were all feeling it at that time, and I go back to this every now and again just to kind of remind myself how far we've come with blended learning models. And then we started, once we kind of got our heads around the fact that coronavirus was unfortunately here to stay, so what next? We started to kind of think, okay, where do we go from here? For me, this was the moment when the whole kind of approach to pedagogy became most overwhelming. As pedagogy lead, I felt like there was just a complete bombardment of research available online and lots of ideas and strategies. And for me, that felt really overwhelming, you know, because I didn't know what was going to work for our pupils yet. And I wasn't sure what we needed to do or what our pupils were kind of feeling. And that kind of work guilt, should we be doing this? Other schools are doing it like that. What should we be doing? All of that started to set in. And it took a few weeks for us to kind of stop and actually hold our nerve a little bit and think, actually, it's not about getting a plan out quickly. It's about getting a plan out that works for our context. And at that point, we started to see it as a more exciting opportunity to experiment, to stop and to evaluate what could this look like for us and what do we want from this next phase. So we started this stage by going back to our pillars, and that's something that's always been really important to us. I personally, leading pedagogy through this, have felt like I've had to hold my nerve with not letting us get carried away with the digital platforms and actually remembering that the pedagogy is the most important part of what we do. And once you lose sight of that, it doesn't matter how upskilled you are digitally, it doesn't talk to each other. So with phase 2, we focused only on video tutorials, and we called that phase returning, reconnecting and rebuilding our pillars. And everything we did on the video tutorial, we stripped the pillars right back, but we kept those pillars at the forefront of our planning. So we looked at high quality modelling and our other pillars, and we thought, right, okay, this is what we were doing, what transfers easily, what won't transfer as easily, where's the work needed, how do we rebuild our pillars to transfer them over to these digital platforms. Essentially then we built towards our kind of summer phase where pupils were experiencing video tutorials. Again, they were very much asynchronous, but they were getting that kind of teacher voice, the teacher modelling, the teacher support that they'd missed so much in the first phase. And then the summer term was a really, really busy time for us, putting a lot of time into research and planning to get our blended learning kind of model ready. We took a lot of time to reflect. What skills do our pupils need? What skills do we need? How do we kind of go about making sure that we develop these skills, bearing in mind that a lot of this is also going to require independent learning skills, which are skills we found the most difficult to kind of coach our pupils in previous models. And again, we went back to our kind of understanding of what effective pedagogy looked like before the pandemic. So the same sequences that we would apply to teaching and learning beforehand, they still existed. You know, coronavirus hadn't taken any of those things away. We just had to adapt to make it fit the new kind of way of learning. And essentially that built to our pedagogy maps. So we have 3 corresponding maps. This is the map for our pupils. And a lot of kind of reading and research has gone into these, but I've just left at the bottom some of our more prominent kind of articles and guidance, the ones that helped us most. And on the pupil one, we had a real focus on both their learning and their well-being. We knew from trials with school council, from learner voice, from parental kind of feedback, which all went into the construction of these models. We knew that interaction, that synchronous interaction with their teachers and their peers was the thing that pupils had missed the most, and we wanted to make sure that each platform provided opportunities for that as well as their learning. The staff map was really important in that it also reminded staff that the blended learning model applies to their own learning as well. We can learn through webinars, we can collaborate through live lessons with each other, we can learn through accessing each other's video tutorials, as well as providing learning for our pupils. So the staff map was about the learning continuum, including learners all the way through to staff, and we're all kind of on that map together. And then really importantly, our parents, working with our parents to support their children's learning from home was really important for us. We're very lucky to have very supportive parents who want to kind of help their children, but a lot of the research actually suggests that the best help parents can give are in the skills like organisation and creating purposeful learning environments and time management, as opposed to needing any of the subject specialisms that a lot of our parents were panicking about. So this map was helpful in terms of reassuring parents. And again, the same kind of sequence that I showed you that we were using before COVID still existed, and we adopted the mantra of pedagogy before platform. We were kind of hashtagging it all over Twitter, making sure that staff were constantly keeping that mantra close to their hearts, pedagogy before platform. Everything that we know about good teaching still exists. The only addition is what platform best suits your pedagogical aims. And we really worked to keep that at the forefront of what we did. The platforms can enhance and develop learning in ways that we can't in the classroom, but they shouldn't be driving what you're doing. Your pedagogy should always be pushing everything forward. And we kind of built this in then to potential models. So keeping what you want the pupils to learn, the skills you want them to develop as the first part of your planning, and then starting to explore how that might look over a sequence of lessons. And our staff are kind of developing their confidence now in using the map to kind of pick and mix which platform and which lesson suits what they want their pupils to do, and having that confidence, we feel, is really ensuring that the pedagogy that's delivered on these digital platforms is of the highest quality. So I suppose to conclude, a lot of the time over the pandemic, I've kind of felt like this image exemplifies how I personally have felt, and I know a lot of colleagues have kind of mirrored similar thoughts. You're kind of in the dark, waiting for announcements, what happens next, what are we doing? But actually, if you kind of keep your vision as your main driver, what do you know works for your pupils? You can kind of bring some light into that, and I suppose make sure that what you're developing is research informed, but for the benefit of your own contexts. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much there, Abi. Wow, and thank you for a really excellent presentation that demonstrates how you've used the research and evidence to inform some innovation in your school and the pedagogies of Pillars of Bassaleg, and more recently around blended learning. So thank you very much. I would like to introduce Finola Wilson from Impact Wales.
Hello, my name is Finola Wilson and I'm from Impact Wales, and I'm here today to talk to you about AUSAPEL's research on knowledge and learning. So let's get started. Here at Impact Wales, just to outline who we are, I'm just one half. My colleague Jane Miller is the other half of Impact Wales, and we provide professional learning for schools across the UK. We're curriculum specialists, but we also focusing on research-informed pedagogy. The research that we're going to talk to you about today is about David Ausubel's research on advanced organisers, which he later went on to develop into his subsumption theory. Even though this research is from the 1960s, it's still a seminal work of educational psychology, and it appears in this book by Kirshner and Hendrick, published this year. This research still stands as important to exemplify what is happening when we are learning. If you listen very carefully today, you will also notice that we have modelled the theory of advanced organisers in this session. So without knowing something about a subject, it's very difficult to understand the finer details of that subject. The reason for this is because all learning is connected. And it's connected through what has been called a schema, or your cognitive architecture. And you can see an example there on the screen of what that might look like. This is a model for how this might look in reality. So let's look at an example of this process in action. Imagine you're walking past a park and you see a man jumping up and down a step with both feet repeatedly. If you've only done the most basic of school sport, you'll think this looks a bit odd, but you have no idea why he is doing it. If, however, you played sport in your youth, you might recognise that he is in fact rebounds jumping. That is, barely landing before he's exploding off the ground and back onto the higher step. Now, if you're a trained marathon runner, you might wonder if the man is recovering from injury, as you'll recognise he's practising plyometrics, jumping to increase speed and strength in his lower legs. So you can see that the more you know about a particular subject, the more potential you have to learn greater detail about that subject. Ausubel proposed that learning is organised in order of generality, just as you would do if you were searching in a filing cabinet for information about a specific subject. You would start with files that were more general. For example, you have information about mammals, then specific learning about cats, and finally understand information about the hairless cat breeds, including the Sphinx, which is, as well as having no fur, has particularly short legs. So a lesson or a curriculum is more effective when you start with the more general and then move to the more specific, because it reflects how we engage with and store knowledge in our memories. So Ausubel's research is characterised by thinking about learning as being connected, and learning is always connected. You can't learn anything without anything new, without making a connection with something you already know. Ausubel suggested that general knowledge should be provided in an advanced organiser, in a form that you can actually see how it's organised, see how it's connected, and then you can learn the more general, the more specific information. So this enables new learning to be assimilated or learnt more effectively. The learning process is a constant reorganisation and revisiting of prior learning. So general principles or learning is constantly being refined and embedded more deeply in the memory. Let's look at Ausubel's actual research now. How well would people learn something that they knew very little about? This was the subject in which he carried out some research. So what he did was he worked with educational psychology undergraduates, and he focused in on the to be learnt information, which was 2,500 words on the metallurgical properties of carbon steel. Now, what happened was he gave Group A 500 words of general foundational knowledge, and he gave Group B 500 words of historically relevant but not directly related background knowledge. So he started with the more general foundational knowledge, added more specific higher order, or as Ausubel describes it, knowledge of a higher level or generality or abstraction. And so you end up with new learning that enables you to reassess and review your understanding. And in the original research, not surprisingly, Ausubel found that Group A, who'd had the related but more general content, actually remembered more of the 2,500 words of the to be learnt content than those who'd had just general historical background information. So we can see that learning is in fact a transaction between the learner and the knowledge. We each make connections that are personal to us and dependent on what we already have understood and have stored in our long-term memory. It is an active process. The way in which we plan curricula and teach them needs to actually reflect this. So Ausubel's work on advanced organisers went into more detail on how that general knowledge can be shared with pupils. So more general learning required by the more specific can be shared in a form of an advanced organiser. And he had various different types of advanced organisers. So he had the narrative advanced organisers, which were to do with narrative stories, which had an effect size of 0.53. He had the expository or advanced organisers, so a short explanation text or speech. And this is what actually happened in his original experiment, which had an effect size of 0.8. He had a skimming advanced organiser process where pupils skim read a larger and more general text, which has an effect size of 0.71. And he had graphic advanced organisers, where a graphic organiser which uses both text and words, as in our visuals, our sketch notes. And this had an effect size of 1.24. So what are the implications for teaching? The first thing is, of course, you need to understand what pupils already know and make sure you build on it. So there needs to be some assessment of what they already know first. We need to make sure that if they don't have enough prior knowledge, that we're actually creating that prior knowledge by actually introducing general concepts first and then moving to more specific. And making sure that the curriculum that you are creating is built carefully in order to sequence learning, moving from general to more specific. So we would encourage you to go away, have a look at David Ausubel's original research, have a think about what that might mean in terms of your own planning for your own lessons, and think about how Ausubel's research would make a difference in terms of developing curriculum design for Curriculum for Wales. If you have any further questions on any of this, please feel free to contact me. My email address is at the bottom there. And thank you very much for listening.
So I guess it's just thank you to all the presenters tonight for the wonderful presentations on how research has informed their online and digital pedagogy. Thank you very much.